philosophy time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll read Logic comics. You can
Okay.
read mine.
So just do the same thing? Oh, hi there. This is James. This is my friend Elliot, and you're watching Philosophy Time.
Some of your work develops the idea that there's a type of imagination that philosophers have sort of underappreciated in the past. And as I understand it, it's fairly linked to your work on metaphor and seeing things as. So could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah. So the kind of imagination that I'm especially interested, growing out of my interest in metaphor, is what I call perspectival imagination. So this is imagination where you're focusing on a particular thing, and or a situation, and you're trying on different ways of interpreting it or construing it. So you might think of just a non-metaphorical example. You know, I might be an evangelical Christian, but I might try to make sense of, I might try to interpret and understand how the world would look like from the perspective of a, committed evolutionary scientist or something, right? And that involves taking the same set of facts in the world and shifting my perspective on those facts, right? What I think is important, what I think explains what else, but it involves reinterpretation of a given set of facts. By contrast, the kind of imagination that philosophers tend to focus on is what is aptly called make-believe, which is conjuring up or creating a certain kind of content in your mind. This is closer to, say, fantasy or something, right? You say, I imagine that there are 6 tigers in the jungle and they are walking in a certain way, or I imagine that I'm being attacked by assailants and da, da, da. So there you are imagining either propositionally in something like sentences or experientially in something like, a rolling film, some set of contents that aren't there, right? So that's a content-based metaphor. You're conjuring up something, you're conjuring up a what that you're imagining. And the kind of imagination that I'm interested in is focusing on the same what and then shifting how you're thinking about that. And that's clearly operative in metaphor, but it's also something that happens in a lot of other kinds of thinking and imagination. And I think philosophers haven't really paid so much attention to it because it doesn't fit in neatly with our overall model of how the mind works.
So could you tell us more about what you mean by this seeing things as in this type of perspectival imagination?
So I think that the really crucial thing about seeing as is that it doesn't just involve, entertaining a certain set of contents. It involves structuring your understanding, your way of thinking about those contents in a certain way, and thereby responding to those contents in a certain kind of way. So there are two dimensions of structure here that I think are really important. One is that some features stick out especially prominent. They're especially obvious to you in your thinking, and others are more sort of downplayed or marginal. The other is that some features are more central in the sense of explaining a whole lot else about how that phenomenon in question is.
So I can see how that's helpful or interesting for us to sort of be able to do. I mean, I can see how we might spend some of our time engaging in perspectival imagination, but I presume you think it's also
Important?
useful, important to serious long-term endeavors in human thought. So, but from what you've said so far, I'm not clear on why that's going to be.
Right. Let me take a couple examples. So some warm-up examples, and we'll get to increasingly intense, important cases. And what's interesting about a lot of fiction is not just that you conjure up you escape to an interesting other world that's fun to, dwell in for a little while, but rather you get into somebody else's head. And part of what that means is understanding how they take on the world, how they encounter it, how they structure, understand, and interpret the world around them. And that can be we feel like we're learning something really important about other people when we gain that kind of thing. You still might think that's kind of frivolous, but you might think that's the kind of thing that I think can be really important and useful for instance, the possibility of genuine political discussion, right? So a lot of times it looks like persistent disagreement about a range of topics, but especially, most obviously, religion, politics, things like that, it bottoms out into a question about like, what should we do about X right now? But the reason that disagreement isn't resolvable is because there's these different background perspectives. And so to the extent that we have tools for manipulating and trying on different ways of thinking about how other people are engaging with the world, to that extent we might actually achieve a kind of understanding that would allow us to make some kind of progress.